We are now going to open our budget hearing 3. And I am going to turn it over to Dr. Gallagher.
Okay. Budget 3, we're going to begin. We have 2 goals tonight. We'll be hearing some 3 more department budgets like last time that will be familiar. But we're also covering revenue tonight. This is probably not what most people consider the most important item, but actually it is the most important item. The first budget hearing where we reveal the budget increase for the next year is generally the one the media pays attention to. But the truth is, it's not what the costs are, it's how much income there is that determines what the tax rates are. So with that, I want to turn it over to Mr. Carlson.
Okay, we'll start with an overview of the revenue and how we're going to pay for this budget. Obviously, tonight we're at budget hearing 3. It's in the red, so we're about halfway through this process. There's one more budget hearing 4 coming up in about 3 weeks. And then the board would be asked to adopt the budget on April 26th. And then the mandated May 3rd is the budget hearing that we're required to give by law and to present the budget in its entirety. And then finally, the culminating event is on May 17th, which is the budget vote at H.C. Crittenden Middle School. This is just a brief review of what we did last week. The budget increase that's being proposed is a 1.3% increase. And the tax levy, which we're going to talk about briefly in a few minutes, is going to increase by 0.4%, which is stay within the tax levy cap. This is the way the budget is broken down into 3 components. This is consistent with prior years. There are big shifts in the dollars in any of these categories. The percentages have stayed relatively the same, with program being the highest percentage of our cost, as you would expect. It has all the teachers, and ironically, transportation is included in there, with the exception of the buses, which is in the capital section. Under administrative is all the office and support staff, supervisory staff is in the administrative portion. And finally, the capital is Steve's area, but the majority of that, as we saw before, is debt service. And as I said just a few moments ago, it has the buses in there as well, that Cheryl will talk about in a little bit. What does the budget include? Everything we've committed to over the years. There's nothing new in terms of major initiatives. We are looking at more monies in technology, as Bill has mentioned in the last couple meetings. But everything that we've had in our programs and have implemented since 1997 remain intact. We're not proposing to reduce any of our program offerings to our children. Here's the new area. Estimated revenues. Ironically, it's the same. We have to present by law a balanced budget. This is a balanced budget. It's also a 1.3% increase. The majority of revenue, as you can see, is coming from real property taxes, including STAR reimbursement. It represents 86.5% of our total revenue. The next area is, we'll go around, if I can get my little music to work. It's not happy. Fund balance appropriation, it represents 4.2% of our revenue budget. The fund balance comes from appropriated fund balance and 2 reserves: reserve for insurance, reserve for contributions, and a very small piece of money that comes from the unemployment benefit reserve. But as you can see, it makes up roughly 4% of our revenue budget. State aid, we know this is still in flux, but state aid has always been slightly less than 4% of our revenue budget. It remains that way in this budget. There isn't a final state budget yet. There's talk about that by the April 1st deadline, which Governor Cuomo has met every year since he's been in office. All indications are the budget will be on time. How much is anybody's guess. We're all hopeful there'll be more money than he originally proposed, but this is where our budget stands now, is $3.4 million. Another slide to talk about areas that we're being shorted on in terms of aid we should be getting under gap elimination. Under other revenue, it's a very small piece, 1.2%. This is primarily sales tax from the county. There are a couple other pieces, refund of BOCES. BOCES is one of those very odd areas. BOCES will receive BOCES aid, also BOCES refund. So the way BOCES budgets is, I'll say very conservatively, where there's a surplus of monies. What happens is that surplus is returned to those users of that COSER, and then that money, that the net amount is what's aidable, and then we receive state aid on top of the refund. So it's somewhat misleading.
Where's the federal funds hidden in this chart?
I'd say they're not hidden anywhere because there really aren't federal funds.
Right.
There was, and I used to put under state aid in that little slice. It didn't change the size of that slice of pie either.
Right.
So if it was a tenth of a point, I'd be surprised.
So despite all of the federal laws we have to follow, it's basically you're on your own.
That's correct.
Okay.
Greg, just the bond that voters in New York passed, I guess, 2 years ago?
The $2 billion.
You're right, the $2 billion for technology spend, which theoretically at some point we should be getting a slice of. Any visibility from the state on when that money comes in?
I was at a meeting a week ago, and the person in charge of it is still talking about it as if it's this brand new program. It's been around. There's been no money borrowed, no money distributed to schools or any other organization for that. So there's a lot of paperwork going back and forth, but there's not a lot of cash changing hands.
Was this the smart bond you're talking
Smart
about?
Yes.
Good. Oh, we never got that.
There's, no, we never got that money.
Well,
We did
there's
put in a
an
plan.
asterisk in there that it could be used for things well beyond what you would envision as smart things. Like
Part of it could
buildings.
be building for kindergarten space, something along those lines. That has an even longer lead time than just what we're talking about, what Andrew talked about when he was here a couple weeks ago, or just last week, wasn't it? It's last Tuesday night. What he talked about was using it for Chromebooks and some other upgrades to our technology infrastructure. So that plan is up at the state. It's been approved, but there hasn't been any monies because we need to spend that money first, and then we can apply to be reimbursed. So it's quite a process. Eventually we'll be able to sit here one night and I'll be able to tell you we got all the money. We might be a little bit older, but we will pursue the dollars we're entitled to. We get very few grant dollars
Right.
to begin with, so this is like precious to us.
Exactly.
It really
Absolutely.
is.
Exactly.
The dollar will not slip through the cracks.
Do you have a visibility on the number yet, or not? Not yet.
It's $333,000.
Okay.
So.
Got it.
And they publish it on the bottom of the state aid runs. If you look online, the state aid runs, it's kind of like an asterisk at the bottom. They show a little piece that says smart school dollars without any explanation. That's what it's for. And back to the other pieces of revenue. The final piece is pilot payment of the taxes. This represents, ironically, more than our state aid, more than our fund balance appropriation. We have 3 pilots. We have IBM, Swiss Re, and then we have Inkel Berman. So Inkel Berman is starting to grow. IBM has a few more years. Swiss Re has a few more years. So those play in that factor. The pilots play into the tax levy cap calculation, which I'm not going to go into detail, but I'll have it on the screen. Another way of looking at this is what's the change from the prior years in terms of these broad groups. As I mentioned earlier, real property taxes, including STAR, is increasing. The proposed increase is 0.4% for the entire change in the tax levy. Pilots are going up based on the agreements by 4.2%. Other revenue, we're showing a 2% increase, and that's primarily through some efforts with special ed to bring in some kids for tuition-based paying basis. State aid, it's not a lot of money, but we're looking at a 3% potential increase. Fund balance, it looks huge, 18.8%, but a lot of this depends on how we end this year and how much will actually be spent out of that. It does provide us some cushion in that area. This chart shows what's happened to our state aid. The very top of that chart is actually 0, and these are decreases from what we should be paid. The gap restoration, these little red marks, that the money that the state debates how much they're going to give us back are the money they've already taken from us. So the blue ends up being the net amount. So if we look on this, the chart on the bottom, this year, they originally proposed to take away $319,000 of our state aid. They're going to give us back $95,000 of what they'll take. We'll end up losing $223,000, which is represented by this blue chart here. So it's still negative. There is talk, and we're all hopeful that this piece might come back in its entirety. So that may go away. There are several schools that are impoverished schools that don't have any more gap elimination. So the state has restored some schools. It's a big debate in Albany. There's a lot of horse trading going on about getting this money back to everyone to be made whole in the state. So we're all hopeful that that may happen.
So would that, Greg, that wouldn't come like as a windfall then, right? It would just be that they'll pay us what they're supposed to pay us
Right,
instead of taking?
exactly.
Yeah,
Okay.
I wouldn't call it a windfall. It's one of those things that'd be nice again, like getting our smart school
Right.
bond money. This will be
Well, but
helpful.
basically, we would theoretically get the 223, but not the 3.2.
That's correct.
Absolutely.
Nobody's
Well,
talking about that, unfortunately.
These, unfortunately, everybody
Even though we
thinks,
should.
so we're going to get our
Right.
gap back. That
That's not
money is
coming
in the state coffers. It's sitting up in $5 billion that Governor Cuomo talks about he has in his bank account in Albany. That's where that money sits. And it comes almost dollar for dollar from schools around the state, which is ironic. But he's very proud of the monies he saved, but here's exactly where it came from, all around the state.
So we want them to stop taking money from us.
Just let's get back on
Yeah.
our feet, and there's another piece of this too called foundation aid, which is the basis of all of our aid. We haven't seen an increase in that in years. We're way behind in that. I don't have a chart for that yet, but I will at some point have
Is
a
that
chart.
really
for
the
that.
test of the constitutionality of this, of the gap elimination adjustment?
I don't know if they've ever, I don't know if there's
I
ever
don't
been
think
a
it's
lawsuit.
constitutional. I don't think it is. I think it's an improper taking. I think we should get together with school. I really do. I think it's unconstitutional.
The tax levy cap, we talked about already at other meetings. This will be on our website for the public to review if they want to see a written explanation of how the 2% tax levy cap works. We know this year it's a 0.12% for the actual inflation rate that's being used for this. And this, this is what our calculation looks like this year. What's different on this is the proposed tax levy down here. This is how much we could go up by. So the maximum we could go up by to stay under the tax levy cap would be 0.43. We're going up 0.4, so we're 0.03 just for Tim. 0.03% under the tax levy cap, which translates to a whopping $15,604. So in other words, if we wanted to have a crazy night and spend more money, we could spend another $15,603 and still stay under the tax levy cap for next year, using our fund balances, bringing in all this revenue exactly as I predict, which you don't want to do. I don't recommend that. We've been very accurate to say good things about our functions here as a business office in budget building, to always end up with a modest surplus, both in terms of revenue and in terms of appropriations. So we're always bringing in a little bit more revenue than we expect, and we're spending less than we anticipate. It's usually less than 1% of revenue with good of the order, meaning adding money to our coffers, and around 3% is underspending our budget each year. So that's the good news. That keeps us kind of rolling along. We're trying to give money back, we bring it back in, and we're just trying to stay at a status quo. And that's been working for us very well for a lot of years.
But people should understand, when you say we spend 3% less than we budget every year, that money's captured and goes into our reserves and ultimately
It gets spent back
Spent
out.
gets
It's used
spent back
for
out the very next
Yeah,
year.
it's used for the benefit of the taxpayer. There's there is the money's not falling from the skies. It's put away for a very short period of time and reused to help mitigate any tax increases, which has been very successful over a long period of time. Here's the components of the tax levy cap. We've seen this before. It's taking that other chart, which was just a table, and put it into this bar chart. The most important part, as you can see, by each of the years of the tax levy cap is this purple area, and it's the CPI. It really drives what happens with it. I haven't put 16, 17 in there, but it shows overall that we have stayed below the tax levy cap each year. Sometimes we're closer than others, but we're always very mindful of trying to be responsible in terms of how much tax revenue we're looking for from the public. And it's something that we take great pride in because we're not going right up to the limit each time. This year, we're very close. It's a very difficult year in terms of the 0.12% inflation factor, which is it's unreasonable. So we're a lot closer this year than we have been in the past. We've always taxed less than we have the authority to do, which I think is commendable on the board's part. Apportionment of taxes, I know Ira loves this as well as Evan and others. I'm not going to belabor this.
You have 4 seconds, please.
Belabor this. This is more to talk about how the taxes are actually divided amongst our 4 towns. For those that are members of the Byram Hills School District, it's made up of the tax levy which we control. We don't control the assessments or the equalization rates. Just more on that. When we get all done, here's how $1, let's say if we have $1 of taxes, where do they come from? In North Castle, if we had $1 for a tax, which everyone would love, North Castle would pay 85 cents of that. Mount Pleasant would pay 13 cents. Bedford and Newcastle together pay 1 penny. So that's how $1 of, when we look at it from that perspective, gets split between the communities. Now they all pay the same amount of taxes based on the full value of your property. That's an important concept, and I'm not going to go into that very much, but that's where the true tax rate, which we talk about each year, comes from. If we look at each one of these in terms of what's happened to property values over a period of time, you can see each one. Here's North Castle. We had a kind of a W happening here. We have a recovery now coming with property values increasing. Same thing for Newcastle. Bedford is fairly consistent. There is a slight increase here. And then Mount Pleasant had a substantial increase in their property wealth. This is based on assessments divided by equalization rates. So that's done by outside agencies, and this is what we're required to use. We take all those factors, we put them into, divided against the actual taxes that we're going to levy based on those percentages, and here's what happens. We have our actual tax rates based on assessed values. In terms of North Castle, the tax rate will be a decrease this year. It's 0.66. Newcastle, a slight increase at 0.8. Bedford will see a decrease of 4.39%, and Mount Pleasant will see an increase of 2.6%. And looking at, these are estimates, because the assessed values can change. It can be challenges to assessed values. Equalization rate will not change, that's final. It can't be challenged at this point. So if the assessments change between now and when the taxes are levied, there's slight changes in this. If we look at the last 5 years, this is just for historical purposes. You can see there's usually kind of a up and down for each of the communities. Once again, the rates I just showed are here, which are estimated. Here's what's happened over time. That's just more for informational purposes. True value tax rate, I just talked about. True value tax rate is this way we can compare ourselves apples to apples against other school districts.
I would just tell the community that I believe that this is the best comparison to really learn whether you're getting a real bang for your tax buck. Is this analysis, which our Assistant Superintendent's about to go through.
So we take the total tax levy divided by the full value of the property. It comes up with a rate per thousand. So for, let's say if the market value of your house is going to be divided by 1,000 and then multiplied by 16.19, will give you your amount of taxes. That gets compared against all other schools in terms of their property value and their taxes, and they're put in a ranking. This comes from Putnam North Westchester BOCES, and we can see that there is a high of $39.23 per thousand, down to a low of $9.38. Highest tax rate gets a rank of number 1, which is not a good thing, and the lowest is at 54. Byram Hills ranks 45th.
We pretty much ranked 45th in that area for the last, we've been
Give or take a
15,
spot,
20
yeah.
years.
Yeah, we've been very, very low for a number of years. So 44 districts pay more on an actual dollar basis based on the value of their properties than people in Byram Hills School District based on the value of their properties. And there are 9 schools that enjoy a lower rate than us, but it's a select group of districts.
And Garrison, for example, doesn't have a high school,
Right.
right? So,
Wow, so,
I don't want to
high school.
I don't want to start cherry picking and taking things out. That's right off the report.
I just want people to
Any
understand,
manipulation.
Garrison is actually an outlier. That number is true. It is the lowest number, but it's an outlier. It falls off the chart
It doesn't
because
have all
of
the
their
costs that we have.
circumstances, yeah.
So in summary, the proposed budget, which we've gone over, is a 1.3% increase, and the proposed tax levy is a 0.4% increase. Overall, the tax rates vary by town, which is included in this chart, in this presentation. And that's it for the revenue side.
Thank you, Greg.
And I have screens for our guests too.
And
Does anybody have questions for the revenue portion?
I have a comment. I think that there are something like 50 or 70 school districts in the state that are actually have a negative tax
Yes.
levy increase this year. In other words, they have to cut their budgets. And there is a bill pending to change the tax levy cap to 2%, just plain old 2% instead of
For this year? So how do
going
you-
forward.
Yeah, I was
No,
gonna
no,
say,
it would be going
so say how
forward.
do
It
we
won't
do the
affect
budgets?
anything this year, but
Wow.
it really should be the case,
So does
if
that-
you're gonna have the tax levy cap, that it's just 2%, period.
Does that mean these schools are potentially going to try to get a supermajority, go over the tax cap? Have you heard?
Some may, but, I think most of them are just gonna have to cut their budgets and shed programs.
So,
Shed programs or increased class size, right?
Well, yeah, that's and increasing class size is shedding teachers.
Right.
So you're gonna shed some expenses.
So speaking of shedding expenses, before we go on, I just want to ask Greg a question. If I understood your report, if you live in North Castle, your taxes will actually, if this works out, your taxes will go down.
If your
Slightly.
assessed value doesn't
Doesn't,
change,
yeah.
yes, they would go through. The tax rate is definitely going to be lower.
Yeah. Does anyone get their assessed rate changed?
They could have
If
been
you-
added on.
if they,
or
yeah, do an
if
addition
they're-
or-
Yeah.
If there's a
Addition,
change
change in that. If
Or if
everything's
you
status
challenge-
quo, yes.
Assessment doesn't happen a lot
Yeah.
around here.
Well, without a town-wide
Cost.
reassessment, that's right.
So it's good, it's good news for that 85% of the
right.
taxes that we collect.
Yeah, I
Especially
mean,
our senior
we've,
citizens.
we've kept taxes very much under control, but it's the first time that we've actually been able to say people are going to pay less. It's good. So
Thank
with
you
that,
very
I'll
much.
introduce our 3 distinguished guests. And I'm not going to do a lot of belaboring, but the purpose of these points is to hear from leaders of some of our most significant programs as far as budget goes, and to get a sense of how they see the year going. And with that, I'm going to get a glass of water, and I'm going to introduce Rob. You can start.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'll start talking about interscholastic athletics. I started this year with a well-prepared, fiscally sound budget for interscholastic athletics, and I completed monthly reviews along the way. I believe that's important to maximize any budget that you're working through. I refer to it as staying ahead of the budget so that I can monitor it from month to month. I'm not looking to change much on how the budget is prepared, and how it's put together, and what it will allow us to do for our programs. This proposed budget will continue to support all of the programs that are presently in place, and that covers 18 different sports, 61 athletic teams throughout the course of the year, and to support those 61 teams, there are 96 coaching positions that we employ 96 coaches to keep those teams playing and having fun. Our overall student participation numbers continue to be strong. At the high school level, they range from 30% to 50%, depending on the season. As Dr. Donahue mentioned earlier, the winter season, the participation is the lowest, and the fall, 50% of our students participate in athletics, and that's a good solid number. And I've looked at the numbers, and that's been pretty consistent. At the middle school, it ranges 35 to 40%, once again depending on the season, and the fall season being the highest. Without too much increase, my goal is to continue to build upon the success in our programs, and I believe that this proposed 2016-17 athletic budget continues to provide a strong program, a quality program based in educational athletics, which is really what this program is all about. It's an education-based program. There's one area that I believe we can build on, and it's in the area of health and safety. The overall health and safety of our students is and always will be at the forefront of everything that we do. And you'll notice the requested increase in the contractual code for our athletic training contract, and it pertains directly to our athletic trainer, to the contract that we have in place. I firmly believe that the stakes are high in athletics, and we need to assess our programs on a regular basis to keep them strong, and to assess what I've really pinpointed is safety and the well-being of our students. I think that this is one of the areas that I believe that more man-hours are required. Presently, our trainer begins his day at 2:30 p.m., right when the school day ends, and he literally walks in. He walks in the door, hits the ground running as the students are lined up at his door waiting for him. Having our trainer here earlier in the day will allow him to be more aligned with our district protocols and procedures, and I believe it will fill a few gaps that I'm looking to tighten up. And
Sorry, Rob, can we just clarify the trainer? Is this someone that's in the weight room?
I'm sorry, our athletic trainer, who is responsible for keeping our athletes safe and is the first person on site if they are injured. Sorry if I didn't clarify.
Big part of our concussion management program.
Yeah, we have a trainer, a strength coach who's in the fitness center, but our athletic trainer works with all of our athletes in several different capacities, really, and the goal there is to keep them healthy.
Okay.
Am I correct that the bulk of this increase on the contractual and other line is the more hours of the athletic trainer?
Yes. And
you want him or her here earlier in the day, but they're not meeting with kids, they're prepping?
Correct. So what will the extra time be focused on?
Yeah.
That's the question that I want to answer here, because I knew it would come up. The larger role and more responsibility in our concussion management program to really take a leadership role in the impact testing of our athletes with return to learn and return to play protocol, and really a follow-up with our nurses and our parents and our coaches, and our school physician as needed, on a daily basis if needed. Presently, really, the contract doesn't allow for that.
Right.
And it's, I believe our athletic trainer is very good at what he does and does a great job taking care of the students. But he literally walks in, the kids are there in front of him, ready to go on the field. And there's really no time to meet or consult with our nurse or a coach or really speak to a parent at length about a situation that's ongoing or how to really rectify a situation. And also with the increased demand, it's in the media every day, with the concerns surrounding concussions. I think this is money well spent for our athletic trainer to have more of a role in managing this, from the impact tests that are given prior to the season starting to post-injury testing if we think an athlete may be concussed. And he would be involved in that process all the way through.
So next year, we wouldn't expect to see that big bump. It would have already been absorbed into the budget. It might be, 1 point something% to allow for, additional costs, the labor, that kind of thing. But we're not going to see a big jump again next year, right?
Correct.
Is that person charged with training the coaches around concussion management?
Yes, and that's one line item that I have in my in the contract, is that there's more on-site training, there's more education that I believe we can get more information out there to everybody in our program, and working directly with our coordinator for health services and directly with our high school nurse and our school physician, where we meet frequently to enhance the program and enhance the safety protocols that we have in place.
And parents. That's a big piece.
Yes.
Getting data from parents that maybe the kids won't share, and then sharing with the parents, the concerns and things to look for, et cetera, et cetera. It's a big learning curve for parents coming
Yes.
into the high school.
And that's another area that we're focusing on as well.
You've come to the district with a new perspective since you've seen the outside world. And now that you've gone through this process of budgeting and you see the programs and you see the interest from students, do you feel overall like we have the right sports athletic team portfolio? Or could you potentially next year, as time goes on, think about making changes in terms of either additions or subtractions for programs that may not be as popular, or other programs where there seems to be demand but we're not filling it today because we don't have that sport covered?
Well, obviously, and I know you know this, that the student interest would drive that, right?
Yep.
And one thing that I'm presently working on, I'm actually meeting with several administrators tomorrow, is to launch a survey to the parents, to the athletes, getting feedback so that I have some data to go on. How are we doing?
Is that the high school and middle school?
High school and middle school.
That's
In
great.
middle school, the trend for modified was going down. Is that still the case, or?
Compared to last year, it stayed the
It
same.
stayed, so it sort of dropped and then it stayed where it was?
From what I can see,
Okay.
yes. And one of my goals is to keep it steady, to keep the participation numbers there so that it doesn't
Right.
drop off, because we do have the concern with the enrollment. And I want to try to stay in front of that.
Mhm.
And through the Athletic Advisory Council, it was recommended that we put together a survey. And that survey, we're getting ready to launch that survey. We just have to fine tune some of the questions and I have to meet with some of the administrators before we do that.
That sounds good.
Good.
I don't want to cut you off from things you're preparing to say, but the equipment, materials, and supplies bump, is that a one-time, and what's behind that?
Yeah, this year I've noticed some of our protective equipment, it's worn, it needs to be replaced, and also some of our uniforms. I've noticed and I've heard concerns from students and from coaches that I should look into that as well, and I've done that. And so there's a modest bump there for those items. And then the equipment line, some of our goals, field hockey goals and soccer goals need to be replaced. So those are the line items there that I think you just referred to.
Ira?
First of all, I think you've had a great first year. Even though there are a couple months left, the signs are looking pretty good. And you're off the hook now you did what you promised to do with the section, so thanks for that. My question to you is, for the sports that require outside funding, that's a bad way to put it, require us to pay for things like rental of ice rink, swimming pools, golf, things of that nature. Are those costs holding, or are they rising? And do you see any of those costs or similar costs that we incur in any way threaten the viability of programs we have?
I did look into those numbers and checked with those facilities prior to preparing the budget, and right now there is no indication that any of those numbers or increases would be above 2% if there are increases.
I just want to follow up on a question that Scott asked, because we have so many sports, I mean, but we don't have bowling, for example. We don't have gymnastics, which from time to time people have tried to develop some traction for. You say that would be driven by students. So would you expect, if that were going to happen, you'd expect to see some sort of program come up from the younger grades and then eventually push their way into a modified JV varsity program, as opposed to establishing something right away at the high school?
Well, in my past experiences, the programs that I've been involved with adding at high school level, they have started at the high school level, where the students initiate the interest, and it starts with an interest meeting. And so that's what I've witnessed, that it started at the high school level.
Has the ski team economically, I mean, did that work out this year? I mean, you must have saved some money if there was no snow.
We saved some money this year because there was no snow, but it was transferred to other programs that had some
Extended
good
season.
runs.
Yeah, and, well, that's
Oh, yeah,
right.
exactly.
Glens Falls isn't exactly next door.
Correct.
We can get back there next year. The other question I have is coaching. You said there were 96 coaches for the 61 sports. We know that some sports have more coaching dollars in them than others. Do you see any need to make any changes in that in terms of adding assistant coaches, decreasing assistant coaches, any significant changes in coaching dollars? Do you see down not only this year, but in the years going ahead as we start to hit some enrollment declines?
Yeah, at this point, no. I've only looked into it looked as far as next year.
Right.
So I'd have to say at this point, no changes to recommend.
Well, I want to congratulate you on the first year, seriously. I mean, you came from a school district with a great program, and you've only made ours better.
Thank you.
So thank you.
Thank you.
One suggestion, you talked about the need to replace soccer goals and field hockey goals and things like that. I know that we don't charge our youth programs in town to use our facilities. And, Ira and I and Robin have been involved in running the soccer program. They're always looking for ways to give back, collect their fees. They buy a pair of goals for the town, for the school district. It's another rock to turn over. And I'm sure you have relationships starting with the regional commissioners. It's just a suggestion.
I appreciate that.
You do that with baseball, right?
And baseball is flush
They
with
do,
funds. They probably won't feel that way, but I mean, the fact is, there's a lot of kids involved in this community using the facilities of the school district and the town at no charge, and they are, in my experience, always looking for ways to pave the way before them, make it easier.
Given
Give back.
the current political climate, I'm surprised you didn't send the baseball team to Cuba. this year. My last question, Scott, Steve, and maybe for you as much as for Rob, which is the condition of our all-weather field and whether or not you see any need for any major investment in that over the next 1 to 3 years. I don't know, maybe both of you can speak to it, but I'm happy to take an answer from either of you.
Steve and I did have a conversation about that, actually several months ago, and just prior to the field being serviced,
Right.
just recently, which is done, as you know, on a regular basis. But for the longevity of it, I'll pass over to Steve because he has more of the history with the field.
You can wait till you report too if you want, which is
No,
fine.
it's okay. It's
Okay.
groomed twice a year.
Right.
They did it 2 weeks ago. And we're looking at, myself and Greg were talking about this the other day. I don't see replacement in the near future.
Okay, great.
Wow,
Good.
I thought its lifespan
It is
was.
past its life expectancy, but we did a rejuvenation process, I think about 5
Couple
years.
I remember
or so.
that, yeah.
You know, some more years, but it really is.
That's good
It
news.
really is
Good.
work. I see nothing wrong with the seams. I walked the field the other day.
So maybe it's just not getting enough use.
So, you know, you may be talking 3,
Kidding.
4.
We need more home soccer and lacrosse playoff games.
So preventive
Under
maintenance
hours.
has really helped.
Yeah.
I think to be realistic though, at this
Field
point,
hockey
it's
game.
past its
Just thinking.
its expected life. So if it could happen,
Because there's no lights.
Yeah.
Right.
It can happen, but even if
mean,
the
you could go out and
structure failed,
start
We'll
to
discuss that next year.
even if some of the seams start coming apart, we can do repairs, you know, a company can come in and sew the seams back there. So it's not like if it starts failing, you have to replace it within a year.
Immediately,
You can probably
okay.
still get
That's
a couple
great.
of years
'Cause every
out.
budget, I keep thinking this is gonna be the year we're gonna have to
Yeah.
replace it, so it's nice.
And the company that does the work, services the field, they have a good reputation. They do a fine job when they service fields. And when you walk on the field, you would never know how old it is.
Well,
No, you-
The field is like brand new. It looks
This
brand new.
year, I happened to be here for something totally unrelated, and it was pouring. And I said, what the hell? I went down to the field, put my hand on that, and it was bone dry. It's just,
Wow.
it really is just amazing.
Amazing work.
Very well.
It has
Bone
a
dry.
good drainage system.
Yeah?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you, Rob.
Thanks.
Did you have anything
Thank
else? Thank you very much. Any other questions? Okay, thank you.
we'll move on to transportation. Cheryl.
And this is your last budget for us.
Yes.
Congratulations on your upcoming
Yeah.
retirement.
Thank you.
See the stop sign.
Just, our salary line is just going down a little bit, that's just moving a person from one place to another. The equipment line, our cameras and radios, things that we put in the buses, we've seen a little reduction there because we've been very prudent fiscally that, we're doing more repairs of them, again, rejuvenating our equipment, and stuff is just being maintained much better so that it just extends the life, so we don't have to buy as many as we have in the past. So we're seeing a reduction there. Our contractual expenses are up, that's where we have our weather services. And another thing is our medicals are going to be changing for the drivers. The DOTs are now going to be a big federal form, and it's going to require, it's like 5 pages long versus a 2-page thing, and they've got to go. We've now got to send them every 10.5 months until Washington can find a way to electronically send the information back to New York State. They're not planning on doing that until 2018. So unfortunately, our drivers now have to go in a quicker cycle so that they can notify New York that they've had the medical certificate requirement done because the information's not coming. So they've got to do that a month ahead of their actual expiration date. SED still mandates that our drivers go every year for a physical, but this federal mandate has, you won't see that probably get any better until 2018, so there's been a slight increase there for all the drivers. Our BOCES services line is pretty consistent, but it brings to mind that perhaps some of the earlier conversations we had, we could look to them for maybe some consultations, recommendations, and things like that. And our materials and supplies are going to stay consistent. We're just very good about monitoring what we do. and that would be the largest component. Any questions as well?
Yeah, Dr. Brown?
Just,
Yeah,
go ahead.
I was going to ask you if there was anything from the comments that we took on the transportation program and anything that you heard up here that you want to comment on or correct or emphasize, just opening that up for you.
Well, this year, we're currently doing 206 trips a day. That is just the home to school program for that. We go to 54 different school locations. So that's an increase over last year. Last year we were in like 46 different locations. So, and all our applications aren't in this year as yet. I do notice we have 3 new locations for next year, so we'll be up to 57 different school locations. It's a we run a really extensive program down there. I mean, we open the doors at 5:45 and we don't finish till 6 o'clock at night with our last home to school. And in between, we're doing our field and athletics. I have been certified in the program that we use to do the routing for our students. So I created a sandbox to help look at some of these issues, and we're running extremely efficiently. I mean, we do overcapacitize where we can because we know what our ridership is in our various areas. So, you know, having an outside look may be beneficial, but we really are, we have some constraints with getting to one place and then coming back out and getting the next group and bringing them here and there with what we have. So a lot of what is driven is, you know, our outside, you know, they have combinations of in-district and out-of-district trips. So those vans are not just servicing our in-district kids, so we're really running it efficient.
So a couple of specific questions. Are you aware of any runs where we have people standing on the bus? No. And when we have a bus driver in a morning run who's got a really extra long run, isn't it that next run that bus driver has generally a shorter run so that they can, you know, if they're out late to pick up Coleman Hill, for example, it's a shorter run because they've got the earlier run to the high school really long? Isn't that the way it sort of works in the planning?
Yeah. Well, they're coming into the high school, middle school, and then leaving to go up into the Bedford area, let's say for that guy, to go get those children to bring down to Wampus. So I mean, everyone has to leave here to go get Wampus students to bring them in.
Right.
And then 16 of those drivers have to go back out and get Coleman Hill. So they don't, you know, there's not much room in between there to do something different at this point.
And I remember in the olden days, you know, a guy used to actually, you know, have index cards or stickers or on the wall and move them around to do this. But we've got software where you plug in the age of the kid, the address of the kid, the start times, all of those requirements, and hit compute. And you can play with that by adding a bus, changing a big bus to a small bus or vice versa, adding a driver, adding a route, and those things. But when you hit enter, it
Yeah.
Well,
draws your routes, right?
no, it's not that automated. We have a mapping system that pins every student, so you see every student. I should probably bring it up and show you. And you build your routes and you can see them and they overlay. So you can change, you know, 5 students from this bus. We dropped a Coleman Hill bus based on the number, so there's no more Coleman Hill, you know, 8, and they were assimilated somewhere else. That's less salary hours here. So we're constantly looking at that. We're beginning to build next year already. We've rolled up all our grades. We're beginning to look at what next year is going to look like now. That has to be done by the second week in August. So we have to be ready for that contractually. So
Just to, I think, help clarify, it's really unlikely that something as simple as, oh, somebody's driving 2 routes that are too long is actually what the problem is. I mean, that's the low-hanging fruit, you know,
Mhm.
that's long gone. One of the reasons I suggested the consultant was not just fresh eyes, but Cheryl's been doing this for a long time, and I'm thinking there's going to be a new person who, this is a very, you know, hot topic in the fall, and that person, we want to make sure that person doesn't make any mistakes they can avoid.
So when would you be thinking about getting a consultant? You're talking about for this year?
Oh,
or
yeah,
the
like
summer?
around the time the basic plan is done. Or it might depend on the person, they might need help building it, kind of,
Well, that's true, right.
but I don't want that person to be on their own as a new person who hasn't dealt with our clientele.
Fair enough.
And moving on to the garage building, that will stay consistent. We have no large equipment needs. We've purchased a new lift. We found a wonderful company to manage and repair the oldest lift that was put in the ground in '94. So it's been, refurbished recently. So there's no huge equipment needs in the garage. They have some smaller tools and whatnot they will need to replace that are shop tools. I think a tire puller a tire machine is in there for next year. Contractually and others, that's some software support for the various, they now take their laptops out to the buses for diagnostics, so we got the latest technology just like the regular repair shops, so that's to support some of those programs. And again, materials and supplies for the garage will stay consistent. And then school bus purchases. Again, we've been consistent with the numbers of vehicles. Unfortunately, this year we've lost 3 buses to rust and corrosion that would not pass DOT inspection any longer. One was 11 years old, one was 10. We just lost the third. I don't know the age off the top of my head. So our plan is to replace 2 of the big diesel buses with undercarriages for some of our programs that need them, hockey and lacrosse and what have you, for all their equipment. So they will be ordered, and 2 or 3 school vans. And I've got to talk to Greg probably. We're looking also, we have a 10, 11-year-old service truck that's equipped to go out to breakdowns on the road. They have, a compressor and whatnot on it. And so there's things that are beginning to fail with that. So this budget go around, we might want to look at that.
This might be an unfair question. What kind of mileage does a 10-year-old bus have?
Well, interestingly enough, it doesn't have, the engines are very good. So we do get good.
Resale?
Yeah, they'll trade them in and we can get, $3,500 for them or something. One of them may only have 75,000,
Wow.
which is not a lot.
No?
We're running some of our vans that are equal age. We've got 2 vans, we're still running over 200,000 miles, so. The in-district big buses are not putting on the mileage that we are doing with the vans. Some of our van runs are doing 1,000 miles a week.
Which is good. It's efficient,
It's very
to
efficient.
run it that way.
It is extremely efficient.
When you have the opportunity to buy a piece of new equipment, I guess there's always a big trade-off between a van and a larger bus, but obviously there's some benefits of the van in terms of shorter routes, quicker time to school, but the labor cost per pupil will be higher. It's cheaper to buy, so there's lots of trade-offs. How do you have a way of just trying to think through all that to make sure we're making the right purchase decision? To add vans where we can and where it's smart, but obviously if it becomes a big cost issue, then go the large bus route.
Right, well, naturally, I think in-district you want to economize by loading your buses as much as you can and using them within the district policies. On average, our average in-district bus run from start to finish, now that's not students stepping on, is about 30 minutes, 35 minutes. So we're nowhere near that 45-minute in-district policy. And that's, the shorter the bus ride, the less efficient you are, unfortunately. And I understand everyone can drive to school in 10 minutes, but you're not picking up 50 other students. So I get that, but to be efficient and use our resources really well, you want to capacitize the bus and run it.
Also, I think, Scott, in terms of your question about big versus small, if you go back to what Cheryl said about the number of schools we service, she said a number over 50. I think you said 54 schools. So for those, there's no choice.
Right, right.
That's a lot.
One of the things we found in some of our earlier traffic or transportation studies were drivers that were stopping more often than the authorized stops, trying to make all the parents happy, and as a result, the runs were much longer than they should have been time-wise. And that was before the days of GPS and tracking and things like that. Can you tell me how you supervise that problem and prevent it from happening?
Well, it's been greatly reduced. What we do is we take a look at when we build the route, and you can circle, you can actually measure that distance. I think as we have a half mile for Key through, when we can measure how far that would be to that bus stop. There's a lot of roads we do not go on, so.
And there's a lot of roads where that, for safety reasons, wouldn't apply. You do want to stop
That's
at
right.
every other driveway
Yeah.
because to ask a young kid to walk on some of these roads around here is not safe.
That's right.
So there's a lot of judgment there, but, the
The customization has been greatly reduced.
Right. Good.
Because we're watching. And when you send a spare out and they're not customizing, you find out rather quickly.
Right.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Thank you very much.
We've benefited a lot from Cheryl's programs.
We'll have an opportunity down the road to more formally thank you, Cheryl, so forgive us, let us do it then.
Thanks.
But you will be getting it. A well-deserved thing.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I thought I was on after this.
I have to keep notes at the same time I'm managing. It's my fault.
What's your name again, sir?
Thanks, Steve.
I'll just start on 1620 operation of plant. We have a 0.3% decrease. Things that drive that are, we spoke about last year, is sensors for lights, everything that we do with light bulbs, everything in the district is either T8s now, which are very efficient, and they're actually turning over a lot of areas to LED lights, which are more efficient, and the hours of life are thousands of hours. So things like that have helped with the electrical cost, and everything that we basically use as the years go on are more efficient. And just awareness of everybody, shutting off lights when we need to, things like that. And the Power Authority has been pretty even the last couple of years. There hasn't been huge increases like years ago. So the electrical costs keep on going down each year. Natural gas has stayed the same. This winter was a very tough winter to judge things by for next year because we saved on oil, we saved on natural gas, we saved on electric, we saved on overtime with plowing, so there was a lot of savings in those areas. 1621 maintenance of plant, we had also a decrease of 5.4%, and that's including the cap plan. I know the one thing that furniture was a very large increase, and that was basically going around in the budget process, talking to the principals and technology. It's just needs for student desks, student chairs, and different furniture that we're buying for technology and things like that. So there was a very increase on that. We haven't spent a lot of money in recent years on furniture. A lot of the furniture in the buildings is what a lot of stuff is originally what we bought when we built the additions way back when, so some of the stuff is getting aged. So,
When you're talking about technology, you're talking about some of the new use rooms that
yeah,
are in the plans?
yeah. And everything that we buy furniture is all on state contracts, and some of it's just with local contracts. So. Building repair and equipment, 1621,475, there was a 7.4 increase. There's increases in the maintenance of the plant. So it's like when we replace motors and ballasts and light fixtures and plumbing supplies, electrical supplies, everything's going up. Everything is just, nothing's going down as far as that. Technology's getting better, but also the prices are rising. So that's why you see the increase there. So overall, there's a decrease in the budget. Cap plan. The cap plan is 485 this year, and some of the projects that we're looking at, and the projects, the cap plan is driven by the AVIs, and it's driven by prioritizing and going through with Rob, his department, going through technology, going through the principals, me and Greg prioritizing, and architects and engineers. That's how we drive the cap plan each year. You have a 5-year cap plan in front of you. Discussed that last year also, that changes because priorities change every year. Like looking into next year, we don't have it on this year, but we probably got one more year of life at it. We talked about the field before, but the track is past its life expectancy. And the first couple lanes are really bad, they're starting to come up. So next year, I'm going to propose in the cap plan that we resurface, basically put a new track in.
Is it safe still?
It's safe.
Okay.
Yeah, it's safe, but it's time. Like I said, the first 2 lanes are getting worn. So there's no trip hazards. We have done repairs, but we're getting beyond that.
Do they puddle more than the other lanes?
No, just in a couple sections where they're wearing, just in a couple little small sections that they're wearing out. The problem is with a track, once that starts wearing out, it goes pretty quickly because it sort of just peels off. Because it's like a rubber, so it's different than the feel. So it goes a little bit quicker. So we're good. We could probably even get an additional year. But those are the types of things, something like that, when you see that it changes our priorities each year. So that's why you see fluctuation in the years. And last year we had 800, it was like 835,000. This year we're at 485. The track has really been showing its age to last during the course of this winter. So it's things like that, like I said, that change it. The field's okay. So some of the projects we're doing this year that were priorities are up in Coleman Hill, you have a gym floor up there that actually is a safety hazard. It's starting to bubble. It's a rubber floor, it's not a wood floor. We can't just do repairs on it. So we have to pull the entire gym floor up and put a new floor down. So that's in there this year, and that's approximately about $60,000.
What's the expected lifespan on something like that?
Well, with that,
That's what, 13 years?
yeah, it's 13 years. What I think is failing is the glue. Whatever they put it down with, I think that's what the problem is talking to flooring companies. You can't take up the floor, clean it up, and then re-glue it down.
Right.
So I think it's just the glue failing. It might be moisture also in the concrete that comes up over the years that also releases, gets air in between the floor and the concrete. So it has passed its life expectancy.
Okay.
But it's going to become an issue soon, so that's why.
But
So
the next one we put down is another 13 to 15 year.
Yeah, and it has to be a rubber floor because of the elevation. It can't be a wood floor,
Ah.
because then there'll be a step up. That's why we did the rubber floor originally when we did the additions. So,
And that's probably, would you say that would be done in the summer?
yeah, it's a pretty quick job. The company would do that, so they would just come in and probably have that done probably in a week.
But the rubber floor is really well received at Coleman Hill too.
Yes.
For a variety of reasons. To
Yeah.
have that alternate,
Yeah, it's done
alternative to the wooden
for
floor.
wood, yeah. It's done well, and like I said, it's past its life expectancy, so. We're gonna be at Wampus replacing floor tiles and different classrooms. A lot of that's done by staff, some's done by contractor. Additional security cameras. HCC, same thing, a lot of flooring tiles. When I met with Evan, he just wants to, just so everybody knows, the floors are all 12-inch tile and not 9-inch, which is asbestos. So there's no asbestos removals this summer for floors. So we're going to be doing a lot of floors at HCC. High school, back to HCC, we're also going to put LED lighting in the library, which is going to look fantastic. So high school installs, same thing, some floors with VCT. We're going to upgrade, we're going to start going to be working with Deepak on the auditorium, changing the lighting system, the ceiling, and the walls and carpeting the runways. We're going to phase this in. Changing an auditorium is very expensive. The seats alone are over $100,000, and they really are for as old as the auditorium
Yeah,
is. They
some
really
are
are.
in bad shape.
There's some are in bad and then some are in good. So what we're doing, we're going to phase the auditorium. Because eventually when we get to the stage lighting, that's another expense that, I have to hire a professional. I don't know too much about stage lighting, but it has to work with the dimmer panels, everything that we do with lighting has to work with all the dimmers. So this year, we're gonna change the ceiling out, the light fixtures, and we're gonna pull that old paneling off the walls and put probably acoustical paneling out on the walls, state of the art, that looks really nice. So I have to get into that, but I'm gonna be working with Depot closely and getting some vendors to help us with some of the design. So, admin building here, we're putting in, we're gonna be doing heating controls. This is the only spot in the district in my office that does not have Johnson controls. That's why you see the windows open over here. So we're gonna have better control of the heat in this building like we do at the schools now. So, that's it.
You know, I had a question back to the high school for a second. There's the additional 30-space parking area. Where is that going?
It's right here. It's right on one side here. It's like a dead area here where I
Yeah.
have that red.
That's going to be, that's,
We're gonna try to get about 30 spots in there. Yeah. And that'll be good for the overflow of parking during the day and.
for events also down there.
Is that a storage pod?
That is all our ballast and bulbs. We recycle all the ballast and bulbs. That's where they go. When that gets full, the company comes and picks it up. So that's what, that's going away. That I'm putting that somewhere else and nobody will see that on the.
Beautiful.
So that'll be parking also for the high school. Seniors will be able to park
Yes.
here as well.
Yeah.
Well, the high school will be lighting up next year, but.
Yeah, and then administration building, we were recapping out here, the circle was coming up more. Have to do some drainage out here and repave the circle. So that'll probably go along with when I get that out.
Well, I know you've been replacing controls in the heating for all the classrooms for a long time. And I'm really glad to hear that it's done. And so you can control the heat from your office of any classroom in the district
Yes.
by getting a phone call from the teacher saying, too hot, too cold.
We can go on, we can change set points. Sometimes, all depends what the problem is. A lot of times it's controls in each unit. So we're limited, but I can change the temperatures. But if there's a problem with the computer chip in there, then obviously I have to call a company and come in and take care of it. But I could also go on a laptop at home. Like when this is done next year, if you guys are having a meeting, you're cold, I can just go on, look at this room.
We could
see
send
where
you
it is.
emails and say, we're hot.
Greg
No,
usually
I-
calls me, so I won't have to wait for that call anymore. can
I know
actually
it goes to morale in the Coleman Hill and Wampus. I mean, some teachers, it used to be, some teachers had, crazy rooms and, their preferred rooms and, all of that sort of goes away with these controls.
Yeah, the controls it has been so much better. Now they're district-wide, just got to finish here, but it has been, the complaints are so much less.
And we're saving money on heating the plant because we could be more efficient on,
Correct, because the unit itself, it brings in a certain amount of fresh air from the outside. It's all computer systems in there. It's
Yeah.
very, very efficient system.
it's a big job.
Thank you. Before we let you leave, I just want to check, does anybody else have any questions or comments? Okay.
Steve?
Steve,
Thank
Cheryl,
you for
Rob,
what you
thank
do. You make
you
us look good,
guys.
Steve. Thank you.
You all do. You all do. Thank you so much, and thank you for staying so
Thank you.
late. We
Thanks.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, so
When is baseball season?
We started.
Or when is it?
We had a first scrimmage today.
before we close budget hearing 3, are there any board member requests for further information regarding changes to the budget at this time? Okay, good night, thank you. Okay, I am officially closing budget hearing 3. And-
Yeah, it's in the budget.
Say that for next year. All right, and then just to repeat the budget steps from here, our next board meeting is not till April 12th after break, and that's going to be budget hearing 4. And at that time, budget's pretty well buttoned up, right? It's our last opportunity to tweak it. And then on April 26th, the community will hear budget 5, which is a mandated budget, mandated meeting. Oh, sorry, that is going to be May 3rd, budget hearing 5. April 26th is going to be the adoption of the budget by the Board of Education, an important date for all of us. And May 17th is the public budget and Board of Ed trustee vote. HC Crittenden from 6:30 to 9 o'clock. And in May, we are going to have assorted principals' coffees where the superintendent and members of the Board of Ed will come to the principal's coffee and be able to answer questions and let the public know in each of the schools about the budget.
And we have the Budget Information Committee meeting also for, even though any members of the community are actually welcome to come to any of the principals' coffees in any of the school district buildings, they can, just sign in for those. We're having a separate Budget Information Committee meeting for members of the community if they want to come and be informed about, in detail about the budget.
Thank you very much. And everything will be on our website if it's not already, the budget. Once, does it go up once it's approved? By Friday? Okay.